everybody. My name's Louise at Lontang. And I just want to share with you why I'm going to the Keystone Pipeline protest in Ottawa on September 26th. Now, for over 10 years, I've been studying the work of hydrogeologists doing environmental impact studies in regards to quarry pits, subdivisions, and other projects throughout Ontario. For example, the movement to place a landfill in Site 41, for example. And what I found is across Ontario there's been a consistent oversight of certain information in regards to the environmental impact studies, which creates a serious risk to water tables. For example, many of the studies fail to have regard to seasonal variance, particularly spring thaw, when the water table is at its highest. Borehole data is too shallow to assess risk to groundwater many times, and we see a general lack of understanding to sediment type and the geology of an area. And I observed the data in regards to tar sands development, and again I found the same flaws. There was little regard for all of these issues. And it turns out that some of the companies working in Ontario are also the ones working at the tar sands. And so I started to try to figure out, why is this data so poor? Why is this data so bad? Well, one theory I have is that if the baseline data is too poor, then you can't really show causality when contamination issues arise. That means that, well, for example, let's take the tar sands. In the tar sands, it was believed that bitumen naturally occurs in the Athabasca River. And then the scientists found particulates that had been lodged on the snowbanks. These are airborne particulates unnaturally deposited by way of tar sands development. And he also found that as those snowbanks melted, there was a spike in toxicity issues of the Athabasca. Now, the Athabasca spikes were measurable, but what we don't have was the pre-development numbers associated with what bitumen occurred in the river before the tar sands began. So if there were to be charges laid against the company or remediation measures demanded, the problem there is that we don't know what the natural baseline data was. And this is a chronic issue for proposals all across Canada, because the test times and the methods used are not regulated, not mandated. And in Canada, we also have a lot of issues of bias in regards to how these projects are approved. For example, the Ministry of Natural Resources has the mandate to promote and regulate fossil fuel extraction and aggregates. And on the same note, they're supposed to be policing it, and they issue the permits. So there's a little bit of a bias when the person in charge of enforcement is also the one issuing the permits, is also the one being told to promote. And this is a concern. We also have conservation authorities who have a little bit of a potential bias, because oftentimes they're funded by the same hydrology firms whose study they are mandated to review. Now, the funding of hydrology firms also extends to university experts as well. And should experts speak out against certain firms or certain practices, they may find their research funding cut. So there's a real chill being put on expertise in Canada. Even at the provincial and federal levels, we've seen remarkable cuts to the budgets of the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Natural Resources enforcement agencies. And recently the Harper government just cut another 700 plus jobs with the Ministry of Environment. At this point, it's reasonable to state that should there be natural disaster issues, we will not have the staff available to reasonably address the concerns to keep the Canadian public safe. It is to the point where these agencies are basically defunct. They cannot realistically handle the projection risks or the mitigation strategies. And even the Department of Fisheries, for example, in all of southwestern Ontario, we only have 2 officers overlooking Department of Fishery issues, and this isn't reasonable. We need more staff, more expertise, more enforcement to really protect the Canadian public. Now, if you look at the logistics of the pipe itself, the Keystone pipe, in the best scenario, if this thing were only transporting water, the total life expectancy of this kind of infrastructure is approximately 60 years. That means in 60 years' time, the entire pipeline would need to be replaced. The problem is that the bitumen being transported by way of this pipeline is made up of a sand quartz composition. It erodes the pipe as it passes through. It scrapes it, creating all kinds of issues. In the first year of existence, branches of this pipeline have leaked a total of 14 times. Now, I would venture to say that this could be a destruction for profit scenario that would benefit those who are in the remediation end of things. And it's interesting to note that when it comes to the environmental impact studies created by many hydrological firms, oftentimes these firms are also the first ones to make money if municipal water goes bad, or if we need a pipeline to Lake Erie or to some other water source. These companies stand to make millions, perhaps billions, by way of potential remediation. So we really have to scrutinize reports. We need more experts at the table. Currently, the federal government of Canada relies on industry to buy and pay for its own studies and its own experts. And because they own that data, they are not bound to share it. So we have a real problem in regards to the transparency of data being shared with the government of Canada and with citizens. Right now, agencies like Coca-Cola have more data on the status of Canadian water supplies than the Canadian government does. They have a bigger budget, a bigger focus. And we can't keep blindly trusting a rubber stamp on a report to make sure that these approvals are correct and that the processes have been correctly done. We need more scrutiny. We need transparency of data. We need a more realistic assessment before we make a commitment like this, because at risk are municipal water supplies, agricultural water supplies, and the water required for industries all up and down this system. Now, the problem is the issue of agricultural water use is out of the scope of the review. The issues of the associated illness costs of smog are out of the scope of the review. Right now, billions of dollars are being externalized onto Canadian and American taxpayers to foot the bill for the associated illness costs of smog generated by the burning of fossil fuels. And this comes by way of heart and stroke disease. This comes by way of asthma, and they can literally see, the research done by the Ontario Medical Association shows that incidences of stroke and smog are relational by the hour. The higher the smog level, the more stroke incidences there are, and this is factually proven by the Ontario Medical Association. Dr. Ted Bodway spearheaded the illness cost of smog analysis, and when I took his data to the Alberta government and I've asked them, what are the associated illness costs of smog in Alberta? They have no answers. They've never done the assessments. They don't intend to. So we don't know what the true human costs are for the people working in the tar sands or the people working in Alberta. We need to know, what are the health implications for these people? Now, not only does the Keystone generate an enormous risk in terms of where it crosses over. One of the largest aquifer systems it's going to go over is the Ogallala Aquifer, which is the water supply used to produce 30% of the U.S. food grain and wheat supply. Now, say for example there was a leak in the Ogallala. Who assumes the economic cost for that associated leak? The problem has to do with the insurance. Many times these oil companies are capped for the insurance coverage that they require for these mega projects. And should the costs of remediation exceed, that cost is assumed by taxpayers. Now, this is exactly the scenario we saw in the Gulf when there was the oil spill there. Are we prepared to pick up the economic costs associated with the contamination of the Ogallala Aquifer and what those costs will have, not only on agricultural sectors, but on food production sectors as well? And what about the municipal costs associated with all of the communities whose water supply may go bad? There's a great deal of concern we have here. We have to really assess the risks appropriately before we give approvals for projects like this. Because right now the insurance realistically doesn't cover the cost. Not all of the cost associated with the production of fossil fuels gets into the economic overview of these projects and their approval processes. We need more voices at the table. We need to hear from the agricultural sectors, from the food processing sectors, from the municipalities involved, from all of the communities involved. We need their voices at the table to tell us how much are those water resources at risk currently from this proposal. How much economically do your communities rely on this water supply, and is the risk worth it? We don't even know. We don't even have those voices at the table yet, and that's what we need to fight to secure. Not only we've heard issues in regards to Peter Lougheed's not supporting the Keystone Pipeline because he wants to see the oil refined in Alberta. What I challenge Peter Lougheed to do is to go visit the Aboriginal tribe adjacent to the refineries in Sarnia, because right now their birth ratios are one of the lowest in the world. Their boys are changing sex. They are born with undescended testes. They have endocrine disrupting issues. They are hermaphrodites. They have sexual gender issues, you name it. And this comes by way of the particulates produced by way of the oil refinery processes. And there's a lot of data out there to prove the link. There are also links to the lung cancers associated. There's a huge amount of various illnesses affecting these people right now. And the problem in Canada with the First Nations people adjacent to contaminated areas like this is that the federal government looks at the Aboriginal contamination issues and they say it's a provincial issue because it has to do with pollution. The provincial level looks at it and they say it's a federal issue because it has to do with the reserve. So the response? Nothing. There is nothing reasonably done to protect these people. And so there is tort damage being done to the Canadian public. There is a concern for the sexual issues of the children being born in these communities. In the Athabasca River, we have contaminated fish, contaminated animals, and people dying of rare cancers at high numbers. And where's the accountability from the oil industry to address these concerns? We have yet to see a reasonable response. So the tar sands oil is not clean oil. The tar sands oil is not safe oil. A lot of people argue that Alberta is a better supply than getting oil from Saudi Arabia. Well, the truth is that the U.S. is so addicted to oil, they will never stop getting their oil from Saudi Arabia or other nations. Nor will this oil even remain in the U.S. The truth is, this is a tar sands pipeline to China. If this goes to the coast, it's going to go to China. Is that going to benefit national security issues? Is that going to sustain Canada's long-term energy sources? I don't know. I don't know. I don't see it as being a safer scenario or a cleaner scenario. I think it's high time that we start converting ourselves to cleaner energy technologies that already exist. We have geothermal, we have hydro, we have wind power, solar power, you name it. Better engineered products to reduce overall energy uses. We have to go aggressive on making our shift away from oil if we truly want to pursue national security issues. Our energy is not infinite when it comes to fossil fuels. We have no choice but to adapt. It's either now or it's later. But if we prolong adapting, then it's going to be our children paying the price for the conversion. That's not fair on them. They're going to have a dirtier world, they're going to have less money, they're going to have a very, very scary scenario unless the adults of today vote for the right people, take the right actions, and start speaking out. We have to be responsible for the generations that come after us. Making extra money on a pension, is that really worth putting civilization at risk? Is that really worth having other people die just so you can have a little bit more money in your pension plans? I think there comes a time when people need to take a stand, and that's why I'm going to Ottawa on September 26th. Because I understand the science, I care about people, and I'm not going to put my kids or the future generation at risk of us not taking action on climate change. Thank you.